Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Once again, I'm presenting my top 5 movies and shows of the year, this time looking, of course, at 2022. I certainly did enjoy more movies and shows than the ones I'm going to talk about here, but I found that keeping this list at a tight top 5 makes it more challenging and enjoyable for me to put together as a list. So I hope that you will find something here that you like. First, one honorable mention, because I know that some of you might be outraged if I don't explain why it's not in my top 5. You know, it would be a crime, I think, for some of you for this movie to not be mentioned in a list like this, and that's The Batman. In a nutshell, I found The Batman, like the Christopher Nolan Batman films, to be a very well-made movie, and yet not what I would really prefer a Batman movie to be. Did I like it? Yes. Enough to acquire it for my collection and enough to want more of this take on Batman, and yet it has room to entice and entertain me significantly more. So I'm hopeful that the action will be more spectacular and the vibe a bit less quiet in the sequel, which I will certainly be waiting for with some anticipation. Like I said, definitely movies and shows, not on this list. I really enjoyed, but I knew the Batman would be an elephant in the room that I should mention. All right, so starting with number 5, Superman and Lois Season 2. There is definitely TV that is better made in 2022 with a better budget that's not on this list. But combined with my existing love and connection for and with Superman, Superman and Lois Season 2 is strong enough to make this list and edge out even the certainly better-made competition that didn't make it on this list. Season 2 focused mostly on the Bizarro storyline and in a very impressive way took what to me has always been a very silly concept and made it into something different that I could take seriously. It continued to lean into some nice family drama. It's still ultimately what I would describe as a CW show, but significantly better than any other DC CW shows that I've watched before it. There's maturity in these relationships. There's moral fortitude that you don't often see in a lot of CW shows that's carried out by the characters. There's more time given to performance moments instead of constantly clunky expositional dialogue, which I often find to be the case in other DC CW shows. This is a story about a good family in the Kents making good choices or trying their best in terrible circumstances, and even when they are making choices that I would say, yeah, that's the right choice, they are living with the fallout, with the difficulty of making those choices. And I think that's how you can have characters with great moral fortitude that are still producing riveting drama, because doing the right thing is hard and it doesn't play out in your favor many times. You have to go through some hard things when you're making the right choices, you know. And even when they're making the wrong choices, I can see how they're motivated from love and I can relate to them on that level. There is committed love between these characters, both Lois and Clark and the two brothers, and friendships as well, deep and deepening friendships, versus the constantly sex-obsessed relationships that are the norm, you know, in most CW shows that usually has some kind of romantic angle. That's the main thing. What kind of romance is this, or lustmance, or whatever the crap. This show is just generally not about those kinds of relationships, and it's such a mature, by comparison, refreshing approach for what you can focus a show on, especially from the CW. It's not higher on this list because the writing and directing does still sometimes fall into CW tropes and an expositional sort of catch me up on what just happened writing style that I think is designed to capture channel surfers watching live TV and jumping on maybe halfway through the episode, or who need a little refresher after a commercial break or something. And so it's still written for this old style of TV that's not really premium, and it kind of gets in the way of what this show could be. It also focuses more than I would like on supporting characters like Lana's family and John Henry Irons and his daughter. I appreciate these characters, but they're given a little bit more focus at times than I want. The visual effects are also not premium tier, and Tyler Hoechlin, if that's how you pronounce the actor playing Clark Kent and Superman, his suit still looks noticeably padded to me, which I feel like they did to make him match the physique a bit more of Henry Cavill. I don't think they need to do that. We've seen the guy without his shirt off, and he's a fine Superman. He's even, certainly more muscular, I think, than Christopher Reeve was. And so I don't think you have to have this big, bulky Superman. And so I hope that there's modifications to that costume coming in hot because I'm ready to be done with it. But while the DC extended universe in the movie world gets its ducks in a row for a reboot, whether that's a soft or a full-on reboot, I am more than happy to have my live-action Superman itch scratched by Superman and Lois on the CW, believe it or not. All right, my number 4 on this list is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. This is a wildly creative movie that's equally committed to action and drama and comedy. So often, movies are going to lean more hard into one of those territories, and they won't be quite, if they're really an action movie, they're not going to be quite as dramatic, or the comedy won't be quite as funny. But they really lean into all these things equally and with full commitment to making them the best that they can be. And so the action was great, the drama was moving, the comedy was bizarre and had me laughing, And there are so many springboards for worthwhile thought and conversation, both for the good values that it affirms that I agree with and the broken worldviews and values that it promotes along the way. At 2 hours and 20 minutes, it's a commitment to watch in one go, and I felt drained afterward both times that I watched it. It's a challenging experience that sometimes left me wondering how I should feel, or triggered a weird blend of simultaneous feelings. It's almost too overwhelming in visuals and mental stimulation to watch more than once a year or so for me, I think. Spectacular action, absurd comedy, moving drama, and a mix of well-intentioned good and bad ideas in its moralizing. It is so effectively so many different kinds of stories, almost all at once at times, appropriately enough. So when you are tired of the endless parade of samey movies, remakes, and reboots, at the very least, I think Everything Everywhere All at Once will provide you with something wildly different from the norm. Number 3 on my list is Hellraiser, the 2022 Hulu original movie. This was just the kind of reinvigoration for the Hellraiser franchise that I wanted. It leans into the Lovecraftian fear of the unknown, but with different dressing. Instead of squids and stuff like that, it's a heavy metal chains and that kind of gothic vibe. But it's these disturbing otherworldly horrors in place of cheap jump scares, which I much prefer in my horror movies. There's almost zero humor. The stakes are tragically personal and played for real drama, which is really valuable to me in horror. The creature and horror effects are largely practical, with, again, that classic heavy metal gothic horror aesthetic inspiration. Performances, I felt like, were all solid, making me all the more feel the tension, the sadness, the horror that these characters are having to go through. I watched this one 2 or maybe even 3 times, I think, before my month of Hulu was over, and I enjoyed it every time. And I hate that it's stranded on that service. It's probably going to be a long time, if ever, before it comes to Blu-ray, because of course they're going to want people to have to subscribe for at least a month to watch it. I really want it in my Blu-ray collection with a bunch of special features. Hellraiser 2022 is now easily in my top 10 horror movies of all time. Number 2 on my list is a movie called Vesper. This is a truly unique take on the post-apocalyptic setting with bioorganic tech that's kind of running the world. It's a story that's, I think, easy to follow, but it has a world that it's set in filled with strange and unexplained elements that make me feel like this dumbstruck visitor on an alien planet. And so much is created practically that it feels all the more disturbingly real, weirdly real and present. And at the center of this incredibly unique world is a relatable struggle of a girl to care for her ailing father and to make her way in this world where both the rich and the poor cause problems for those around them in a struggle to obtain retain or hold on to whatever power they can in whatever tier of society and economics they find themselves in. It's also made up of a cast of unknown performers, as far as my knowledge, who are, I feel, suited to their roles. They're strong, emotive performers that helped me care about the people in this dark and dreary world. It's a fascinating setting that I think calls for repeat viewings to really try and become acquainted with. And it's got a runtime and pace that makes the prospect an inviting one for me rather than an intimidating one. It's releasing on Blu-ray on January 10th, and I can't wait to get my copy of Vesper. And then finally, number one is the season 1 of Severance on, I believe it's Apple TV Plus. Now, if you look at promotional imagery and other small samples of this show, it may give the impression that this is some boring, high-concept snooze fest, but for me, it was the most riveting TV I had watched since possibly my beloved Farscape. Very different from Farscape, but I mean, in terms of how much it hooked me in and was like, wow, here's something new in a TV show. It's an actor's show, and by that I mean it's giving time for the performances to tell the story, not merely the words that are coming out of their mouths. And I think you can get so much more interesting complexity and facets of who these characters are than them just talking about each other, or talking about themselves. And so they're exploring through these performances some really rich layers of nuance, and as well as layers of thought, layers of emotion among everyone in the ensemble cast, especially Adam Scott in the lead, but really all the performers, especially by the end of the season, really have their characters explored in some neat ways that are really driven a lot by their performances. What starts out as a quirky, quiet comedy becomes a progressively more bizarre and emotionally investing comedy drama for me. I hate that it ends on a brutal cliffhanger, but I am thrilled that it's been renewed for a second season, which will almost certainly be my most highly anticipated show whenever it comes out. We may have to be patient for a while. They have started filming, but it took them 2 years to do the first season, and so it's not necessarily going to be 2023 when we see the second season. But this gripping and fascinating show about segmenting memories between home and work life takes such a simple concept and made something that just kind of hit my personal entertainment landscape like a silently exploding nuclear bomb in 2022. Really enjoyed Severance. And then finally, as I do every year, I'll share my pick for the most thought-provoking piece of film, whether that's movies or TV shows. Most of my selections on this list also had really striking springboards for worthwhile thought or conversation about important real-life issues. But I think that I have to give this one, not by a ton, but enough that I feel confident in this choice above the others. I think I have to give this one to Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Perhaps for the sheer number of thought-provoking thematic elements put forth by those involved, both in ways I agreed and disagreed with. You can watch my review where I talk for about 10 minutes, going pretty rapid fire through a bunch of different thematic elements that came out to me in my first viewing of it. And for me, the most striking was possibly the unintended lesson, was the possibly unintended lesson, because I don't think in exactly the way I'm going to state it is what they intended. But the idea that we can learn about, that we can see past the issues we disagree about with someone, to the concealed and buried pain and the heart cry in them that's driving them, and the unconditional love they often need from us long before they can ever be persuaded to change their perspective. Now, in Everything Everywhere All at Once, like so much of entertainment, the writing is presented in a way that makes unconditional love synonymous with coming around to agree with some contested view between two characters. And that's ultimately what happens in the end of this. The two characters are butting heads because they see something very, very differently. And one of them, eventually kind of comes around in a way that is fully accepting of the view of the other person and, just kind of like the life that they're living and stuff. There's not really the nuanced one that we as the nuanced path that we as Christians ought to be pursuing, where we are first and foremost making our love for someone, our unconditional love for someone, overriding and clear, without necessarily saying that we agree with their worldview and their view on this particular issue of human life. Because I think that we have to meet people there a long time and consistently before we're ever going to have a voice in their lives that would potentially be a part of many things that God might use to persuade them to see this contested view that we have between us differently, So I think that there's an opportunity to consider that very strongly presented in this movie. So for that and so many other great springboards, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once was the most thought-provoking movie or show for me in 2022. All right, well, that is my list for 2022. I'd love to hear about the shows or the movies that stood out to you from last year. Stay tuned. Coming soon is my top 5 games of 2022, which is going to be covering, I'm pretty sure, video games definitely, and I think one tabletop game is definitely going to be on that list too. Then be sure to check out the Christian Geek Central podcast for lots more content as we together try to geek out and seek the truth. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.